Mm. Good morning. Good morning. This is Valerie Leonard. I am the founder of Nonprofit Utopia. I want to welcome you to today's program. We're going to be focusing on how to develop a theory of change. And if you can just hold on just a moment, I just want to make sure that we are on live with Facebook. Yes, we are. All righty. So as you may or may not know, that this is the strategic planning month in the Nonprofit Utopia community. We are going to focus all month uh, on strategic planning. So we're going to talk about how you can get prepared for strategic planning and then take you through every step. So we got about 7 or 8 webinars that are scheduled for the month so we can walk you through the process. And if you're a member of the Nonprofit Utopia community, you will have those handouts ready, and we can also make sure that we set up time, if you so desire, to help you put together your own strategic plan in your own organization. So I welcome you, and Carlina, welcome, welcome, welcome. All righty, so without further ado, we're going to get started on our presentation.
Hi, Valerie.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, good, good. I I need to share my screen, and
I can't see you on Facebook.
you can't see me on Facebook.
No, I can't. Oh, now I can. You
Okay.
just showed up. That's great. Okay, thank you.
Oh, all righty. All right. So again, I want to welcome everyone to today's program. In case you didn't hear, this is the Strategic Planning Month in Nonprofit Utopia. We're going to be focusing all month on strategic planning. We're going to walk you through the process from start to finish. This will include the steps that you need to prepare, as well as going through the strategic planning process itself. Last week, we focused on doing a community needs assessment, and that's one of the first things you need to do in the strategic planning process to make sure that your strategic plan is responsive to communities. We talked about why you would need a strategic plan, as well as why you would need a community needs assessment. All right, today we're going to focus on taking that next step, which is a theory of change. A number of organizations tend to skip this step, one, because they don't know how to do it, but two, they're so focused on the long range planning that they may not necessarily think about the need to do what we call an evidence-based strategic planning process that is grounded in data and is responsive to the community. So we're going to show you how to link those community needs assessments to your strategic planning process through this theory of change. So think of the theory of change as a bridge between your community needs assessment and your strategic planning process. All right, so I'm going to share my screen, and then I'm going to pull up the presentation, and then we will get started. And again, thank you so much for joining us. And Leslie, welcome. I know your mic is muted, but welcome and thank you for coming. Leslie is one of our founding members.
Thank you for having this training program, Valerie. I really very much appreciate it. And thank you so much for what you do in the nonprofit ecosystem. It's very, very needed. Thank you.
Okay, awesome,
Now,
awesome. And those of you who are watching on Facebook, I did post a link to the Zoom room. You can join us in the Zoom room if you'd like. You can continue to watch us on Facebook Live, on YouTube Live, Periscope, and a number of other live streaming services. But if you want me to see your comments and you want to participate in the room, we invite you to the Zoom room, and you'll see a link to the Zoom room on my page. That's the Valerie F. Leonard page. That's my personal Facebook page, and my personal Facebook page is public, so you can go ahead and download that and join us in the Zoom room. Again, we're very, very happy to have those of you who are watching on Facebook Live. We had a wonderful, wonderful discourse last week, and I'm hoping that we can have that same magic today. All right, so we're going to talk about, again, as I said before, how to develop a theory of change. And before we do that, as always, I'd like to talk about Nonprofit Utopia, let you know who we are and all that good stuff. We're the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders, and we've created an environment that is safe for people to share their experiences and exchange ideas and resources. If you want to learn more, you can join us at nonprofitutopia.com. That is our community and membership website, and you can find out more about us also on our free website. That's nonprofitutopia.com. And our mission is really to develop the next generation of nonprofit leaders. And we do this through providing ongoing professional development and networking opportunities. We do it through consulting, we do it through coaching and our online community. And our goal is to train the next generation of ethical nonprofit leaders. And our mission and our vision is to strengthen the global nonprofit sector by providing training and development opportunities for 50,000 emerging nonprofit leaders throughout the world between now and 2033. And just to give you a little bit about myself, as you know, I'm the founder of Nonprofit Utopia, and we're the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders. In addition to running this community, I do consulting. I teach courses at UIC for their online certificate in nonprofit management program. I also teach at Roosevelt at the Heller School of Business, teaching social enterprise. And Carlina Mello, she is one of my former students, recent graduate, and she currently works here with me at Nonprofit Utopia. This is her first official day at work, and I thank her so much. She's awesome, getting off to a wonderful start. And I am also the host of Nonprofit Utopia Internet Radio Show. We're on hiatus and we'll be starting up in the fall, and we're going to be doing a show where it's simultaneously a podcast where you're listening to us on radio, as well as having the opportunity to view our guests on live streams. Alrighty, so enough about me, enough about Nonprofit Utopia, and to now share what we're going to talk about. Today, we're going to talk about asset-based community development. As you know, we talked about that last week, but I thought it would be good to review it this week to lay the foundation for today's topic. We're also going to review the community needs assessment process, and we're going to give you a definition of the strategic planning process within the framework that we're working, and give you a definition of the theory of change. And then we're going to review 3 models for developing a theory of change and share with you some worksheets that you can use so that you can try this at home. Alrighty, so at this point, we're going to review key concepts. We're going to talk about strategic planning, asset-based community development, community needs assessment, and the theory of change. So as we discussed last week, an asset-based community development process is a process that really, rather than focuses on needs and deficits of communities, we're looking at the assets that they already have, the tools within the people, institutions, and community organizations that are at their disposal, And we believe that communities already have the answers to the problems that ail them, and we need to work within the community first and then branch our way out to bring in resources from outside the community to leverage what's already there. And basically, the people that live in the community are the real solutions to the problem. And we talked about a community needs assessment, and community needs assessments are basically, according to Charlie French in Community and Economic Development at the University of New Hampshire Cooperative Extension, he describes the community needs assessment as a way of gauging opinions, assumptions, needs, key issues, and/or assets within a defined community. And as we discussed last week, there are a number of reasons to conduct a community needs assessment, and we like to look at this as an asset assessment. And the reason you would do this are several-fold. One, to develop proposals, new programs, and to improve existing programs. Two, you want to describe the current lay of the land or the situation. Three, you want to identify community needs, concerns, and issues. Four, to develop marketing strategies. Five, galvanize grassroots action around needs or issues. Six, determine whether or not needs have changed. And seven, to collect the community's hopes, dreams, and desires. And eight, to make sure programs remain relevant. But before you get down to the program level, you need to start out with strategy and organization strategy. So it's important to really understand the community and ways that you can affect change before you actually engage in the strategic planning process. So there are four things you need to do in order to demonstrate need for a new initiative. And again, this is a review of last week. The first thing you want to do is identify key issues of concern to the community. The second thing you want to do is identify people who are most impacted. Three, you want to identify gaps in service and/or opportunities to introduce new services. And four, demonstrate demand. As we indicated last week, just because there's a need for a program and just because you have the assets in order to develop a program doesn't necessarily mean that there's a demand. Doesn't mean that people want it. Doesn't mean that if you build it, that they will come. So it's really, really important to understand some of the problems and some of the needs as well as the assets, but also understand what the people want and engage them at every step in the process of developing new programs, developing strategic plans. So in summary, the community needs assessment process is, first of all, you need to define the scope, and the way you define the scope is obviously doing research and understanding the magnitude of the problem. And then the second thing you do is you decide whether or not you want to go solo or collaborate. Step 3 is to collect data. Step 4 is to determine key findings. Step 5 is to set priorities and create an action plan. And step 6 is to share your findings. And this process perfectly sets the stage for developing your theory of change. All right, and before we go into theory of change, we want to talk about strategic planning. And for our purposes, we're defining strategic planning as a process in which an organization takes stock of its mission, vision, and core values to position itself to capitalize on changes in its environment. And the end product is a set of strategies to achieve a set of long-term goals and objectives for the organization. All right, and the critical questions are, where do we want to go and how will we get there? The where do we want to go questions, that determine the strategic direction. And, that's a broad, that's broad and at the organizational level. And then also at the organizational level, how do we get there? That will be strategies and tactics. But again, before you even get to that point, ideally, you want to engage in a theory of change process, or TOC. So a theory of change describes a process of planned social change, including the assumptions that guide its design to the long-term goals it seeks to achieve. It can also be described as a map of the process. And, many people have different approaches, and we're going to share with you three. And it establishes a blueprint for the work ahead. It anticipates the likely effects. So you want to look at cause and effect and make sure that the remedies that you are proposing can actually solve your problem. It also reveals what should be evaluated when and how. And this definition comes from mapping change using a theory of change to guide planning and evaluation. And this was published by Grantcraft, and that's a project of the Ford Foundation. Again, this is used, for several purposes in program design as well as program evaluation. But it's really, really important to use it in your strategic planning process because, as you know, your program design flows from strategy. Alrighty, so we're going to talk about three models for your theory of change. And the first one was developed by DIY, the Development Impact and You. They're based in England. And here is a really good worksheet that they have put together to help you really, really think through the process. And if you're a member of the Nonprofit Utopia community, you will find a link to resources that you can download. And this is one of the resources, and it also comes with detailed instructions. But this, I think, is a very simple model, and it helps you to think things through in a logical way. And this also can be used to develop your program logic model, which comes after your strategic planning process. So the first question you want to ask after engaging in the community needs assessment process and after identifying the assets to actually solve those quote unquote problems is, what is the problem you're trying to solve? So in this area, you're really describing the current situation. You're describing what's going on in the community, some of the issues, and also providing some of the consequences of not solving those problems. And then here below, you make your key assumptions. And then the second question you want to answer is, who is your key audience? Who are you trying to reach through these processes of change? And again, you have key assumptions. And ideally, you want to take this chart and blow it up to poster size and use it to do brainstorming within a group. You never want to do a theory of change in a vacuum. Ideally, when you're doing this brainstorming process, you want to convene a group of stakeholders that will include people from your board of directors, people who develop the programs, people who actually run the programs, people who use your programs and services, so your clients, people who live in the community, people who might partner with you. So as well as funders, anybody who has a stake in the program, anybody who really, really has a vested interest in seeing you succeed, or who could be impacted for the better or for quote unquote the worse by your activities, should be at the table brainstorming. All right. The next question you want to answer is, what is your entry point to reaching your audience? And again, you're going to have key assumptions here. And then what steps are needed to bring about change? And then you have your assumptions outlined here. And you notice that the arrows flow one from the other. Each step is kind of dependent upon the step that came before it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So after you figure out the steps that are needed to bring about change, then you begin to ask a series of questions. What's the measurable effect of your work, right? So you want to think of the various measures, right? What's going to change and then how you're going to measure it goes here. And then here, after you figure out how you're going to measure the change, what are the wider benefits of your work? And you do a list here. And then here, what is the long-term change you see as your goal? So in many instances, not all, but in many instances, people like to start here first. They like to uh, start with their vision. If they were successful in developing their strategic planning process or their program process, what's going to change in the community as a result? What's going to change for your clients as a result? And then they work their way backwards. All right, and this is an example, a real live example. And if you can bear with me, I need to make sure I can see. All right, and this was put together by Development Impacting You. This is an example that was put together by one of the organizations that actually use their framework. All right, so you can see in answer to the question, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And this is an organization that focused on HIV and trying to make sure that they can use people who are impacted by the disease to actually create programs that will help others who are also impacted by the disease. So what is the problem you're trying to solve? They clearly went through a brainstorming process and used Post-it notes. One of the problems was understaffed health centers. The fact that if you have HIV, there's stigmatization. They also shared the fact that 700 children were infected daily. And one of the key assumptions is, only if problems, you only focus on these problems only if the problems are still relevant and if there's no cure. So they clearly made a commitment to work on this problem until it no longer is a problem. And then this column, they focused on targets. Who is your key audience? This would be empowered HIV mothers, the people who are empowered by, and this would be other HIV positive mothers. And then this is children of HIV positive mothers. So you notice they are working with the stakeholders of women who have HIV, who are HIV positive. So their children, the mothers themselves, and then matching the empowered mothers with mothers who may not necessarily be impacted. And the key assumption here is only if mothers need work and mothers actually care about it, right? So they're not going to waste their time with women who are HIV positive who don't see this as an issue. All too often, we work with programs, we develop programs, thinking that we know the answer to the problem and thinking that people will come just because we build it. Again, remember, just because there's a need doesn't mean that there's a demand. So in this case, they're making sure that, yes, there is a need, but there's also a demand. Otherwise, they're not going to focus on this particular target. This third column, what is your entry point to reaching your key audience? So, you can look at this as distribution channels. So here, the medical centers, local government, elected officials, national government, and here the assumption is the health centers need staff and the government cares. So they're not going to have women volunteering in these medical centers offering support to other women if the health centers don't need staff. And they're not going to deal with this problem if the government doesn't care enough to share resources. And then the fourth column, what steps are needed to bring about change? One, they need training for mentors. So in order to affect change, they have to have training for mentors. Notice that they're creating a relationship between cause and effect. In order to make change, you need to have local awareness, because if people aren't aware of a problem, they're definitely not going to support you, let alone help you make change. And then in order for that to happen, you actually need to organize support. All of this local awareness and training is for naught if you have not organized the support. So those three factors have to be in place. And then they're only going to do this if mothers are willing. So the HIV positive mothers have to be willing. And then we have to make sure that the barriers, from government stigma are removed, because if government is stigmatizing victims, 9 times out of 10 they're not going to allocate the resources. So then, excuse me, what is the measurable effect of your work? All right, so if they indeed are having an impact, then what they will expect to see is mentoring mothers who are ready to help. So these are mothers who are HIV positive, who are willing and ready to help other mothers who are newly diagnosed with HIV, helping to form support. Okay, bear with me. I ended up getting ahead of myself. All right. And then the next measurable effect is HIV positive mothers will visit medical centers and get help. So this is something you can actually quantify. You can actually quantify the number of HIV positive mothers who are visiting these centers. And then another measurable effect is the mentoring scheme becomes national. So you notice they're starting small, they're starting at their local organization level, but their goal is to bring this nationally. They want to scale it. They want to take this as a model program and show other people throughout the United Kingdom how to do this. And then they can only do this if staff can provide the training and there's peace in the country. All right. So, and I believe that even though this organization is based in England, they were working with a developing country. I believe maybe India. And then here is, what are the wider benefits of your work? If this program is working, then women who are HIV positive, they have the confidence and they have the confidence to go out and get work and earn money to support their families. And then they become healthy and empowered HIV positive mothers. And then all HIV positive mothers will get treatment. And this can only happen if they have enough mentors and if those mentors are actually needed. And if they have an adequate stock of medical supplies. And then the last thing, this is the overall big picture. They want to improve the health of HIV positive women and their families. They want to reduce the HIV stigma. They want to eliminate pediatric AIDS by I don't know if that's 2075 or 2015. It might be 2015. And then mothers, they're going to have mentor mothers and HIV positive mothers, plus the medical centers. So this can only work if there's partnership between the mentor mothers, the newly diagnosed HIV positive mothers, and the medical centers. All right, before I go to the next model, are there questions about this? All righty. And if you are watching from Facebook Live or YouTube Live or any other live stream, I can't see what your posts or questions are. If you have any questions, I will address those afterwards. All righty. So,
No questions on Facebook.
okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So our second model is from the Wallace Foundation. This is from their Community Learning Opportunities Program. And this is something they developed probably around 2012 or something like that. And the Wallace Foundation, they developed a program where they wanted to encourage groups of community organizations to focus on improving education in their local communities and be able to scale those processes. So I believe they gave out awards of $75,000 to several organizations to invest in a planning process that would last 6 months. So the first stage in their model is strategy development. And this would mean that grantees and community stakeholders would build and sustain a coalition and a strategy for out-of-school learning and define clear outcomes for children 6 to 10. For example, improve literacy skills and behaviors, and outcomes are very specific about how much, for whom, how will we know, and then make sure that benchmarks support a management plan for performance change and feedback. So again, here we have the basis of an evidence-based program. So they start with they start with a framework that's going to demand that they create change that can be measured, and it's very, very specific. All right, the second step is lining things up, changes in supply and demand. All right, so in this case, the criteria is community institutions implement organizational change. So that's supply. So that's working within their own community and their own capacity as an organization. And then they want to make sure that they work on the parents. The parents have an active role, and the parents are actually demanding change. The parents are also demanding services, and then that there's a consistent message to the community. And then the next step is increase support for children's out-of-school learning. So they wanted to see programs in which parents and community institutions provide engaging, challenging out-of-school learning activities, so not just babysitting, and reach a substantial proportion of children who lack these supports. So again, we're talking about scaling. We're not looking at, one organization and their 25 to 50 kids. We're looking at multiple organizations who each have 25 to 50 kids, and then impacting that whole community as a system. And then finally, you're looking at improved learning for children who are 6 to 10 years old. And the evidence is children reach the defined outcomes, parents and community institutions sustain their support for out-of-school learning. All right. So here is an example of one of their grantees. That's the Elm Harbor organization. And this is the framework that they use. So they adapted the Wallace Foundation's model, right? So again, we're starting at the base. Stakeholders in the Elm Harbor region come together to create the PAC initiative. And then here in the second phase, this is, I believe, the supply and demand. Parents and caregivers understand family learning. they're aware of opportunities, they have access to opportunities, and they have the skills and resources to participate. The programs they welcome families and they offer a wide variety of high quality, engaging activities and programming. And then key stakeholders encourage and support family learning opportunities. So again, this is, you can also think of this as a collective impact model, collective impact model. So notice everything flows from the base. The first thing that happens is you get your stakeholders together. Second thing is you are creating a demand. And then once you have that demand, that would lead to families increasing their participation in learning. So that would mean the stakeholders for the children, parents and caregivers remain engaged in a child's learning, and children actually enjoy the learning activities, and the community values and supports family learning. And over time, you're going to see improved learning for children and their families. Okay, so that is a real life example of a theory of change being implemented. Are there any questions or comments? All righty, so this is the third model for our theory of change, and this is from the Ford Foundation. And this is one of my favorite models. And this model, it starts off with your mission, and this is assuming that you've already done the work of exploring what's going on in the community, what the needs are, what the assets are, what the issues are, and how you're going to solve them. So you start off with your mission, you make, okay, I guess I had to be very careful with my fingers. My computer is very sensitive. Bear with me. All right, so you make certain assumptions based on what's going on in the community. And then after that, you select a target. And then you develop your strategies and programs. And then after you implement the strategies and the programs, you do a reflection, see what worked, what didn't work. And then you also focus on the outcomes. And then after you see what worked and didn't work, you feed that information back into your mission, and it becomes a continuous loop. All righty, so I'm going to pause it right here. I want to be able to show you some of our handouts that will help you to get through this process. Okay, if you bear with me. All right, so if you are a member of the Nonprofit Utopia community, if you go into the community, you'll see on today's news stream, you'll see a post talking about today's program, and you'll also see a link to this box folder. All right, so we have one resource. We've got the Theory of Change Tool for Strategic Planning resource. All right, and then we've got the Theory of Change size. Okay, size A4, but really what this is a worksheet showing you, the second model, showing you how to actually develop your strategic, not your strategic plan. This is your theory of change, and this is going to be your basis for a strategic plan. All right, and this flowchart is a flowchart that I developed based on the Ford Foundation model. And this is what I'd like to share with you and go into a little bit more detail. All right, so again, our mission is, what do we do and why do we exist? And you develop that mission, assuming that you've already gone through an exploration of what's going on in the community. And we'll talk about how you can flesh out your mission and vision and core values. And then after that, there are certain assumptions that you need to make. And you begin to, in order to make those assumptions, you need to ask yourself a series of questions. And those questions could include, what problem will we address? What's the cause of the problem? At what level do we want to work? Do we want to work at the organizational level, the community level? Do we want to work at the government level? And if so, is it local government, federal government, whatever? So you want to define your scope or your geography. And then you want to determine, what impact you're going to have. And then you want to also ask yourself, what does success look like? And after that, you begin to refine your target. So who or what is going to be impacted by our work? And, the who, that target is really dependent on the type of work that you want to do and the change you want to affect. And then you ask, okay, you know what? I need to share my screen, right? All right, I'm sorry about that. So this is a flow chart. So after you figure out your target, you ask yourself, who or what is going to be impacted by our work? How do we reach, influence, or impact identified groups or structures? And then you ask yourself what tools that you're going to use. And after you develop your target, then you look at the strategies as to how you're going to reach them and how you're going to actually make improvement. And so at that point, you ask yourself questions like, they don't have to necessarily be these exact questions, but there'll be questions like, what tools or processes would we need in order to impact or influence the identified groups and structures? What resources, and that could be financial, time, skills, and knowledge, would we need to employ these tools and processes to effectively influence the target groups? What resources do we have already? How can we leverage the resources? And, I'm not going to read all of those questions, but, again, if you're a member of the Nonprofit Utopia community, you will have access to this downloadable file, and there's a worksheet that goes with it. All right, so after you implement your strategies, then you reflect upon the work that's been done. And you ask yourself, questions like, is this something our organization can work with? Will our key stakeholders be comfortable and in agreement with this proposal as a reasonable and accurate analysis? And then what is our plan of action? And then we have to decide what is our desired outcome. What's success going to look like after year 1, year 2, year 3, even 10 years out? And how are you going to know that you've succeeded? And then how are you going to measure your success, and what indicators will you use? And then you go through that iteration and you feed back into the process all over again. So you're constantly improving your strategic planning process, and you're constantly improving your program process. And the reason it's so important to do this before you get into a program or strategic planning process is you want to make sure that your organization is positioned to, one, know what's going on the ground, so to speak. You want to be able to elicit feedback from key supporters, and not only feedback, but key buy-in, and you want to engage them and make sure that they are part of things from the ground floor. You want to make sure too that whatever process you're working with is grounded in theory, not to a point where it loses its human feel, but you want to have evidence that there's a need for your process. You want to have evidence that there's a demand for it. You want to have evidence that the interventions that you use or the programs you use, the services that you use or the tactics and strategies that you use actually are working, and that you have some measurable proof as to whether it's working or not working, and then it can help you to make adjustments as necessary. All too often, we go into the strategic planning process or the program development process without having done this hard work, and then we run the risk of developing programs or developing strategic plans that are not relevant, that have not put us in a position to actually make a change. All right, so I'm gonna go to the next PDF. And this PDF, this is a worksheet. And basically what this does is it takes all the questions that were in that flow chart and it lets you answer those questions, helps you brainstorm. And again, I encourage you strongly not to brainstorm in a vacuum. Don't do this by yourself. Do this, answer these questions in a group. All right. And if you're a member of the Nonprofit Utopia community, feel free to download these handouts. And if you have questions, you can post them in our forum. All right. So I believe I've gone through everything. Are there any questions before we close out? All righty. I am going to share my screen one more time. And if you have any questions, you can contact me at Valerie F. Leonard at nonprofitutopia.com. And if you're a member of the Nonprofit Utopia community, you can go to our forum and post any questions that you might have. You can download any of these handouts and start your own process. And again, as you go through that process, I'll be more than happy to respond to any questions that you have. And we also have a number of members who are well-versed in strategic planning and organizational development. If you want to post something and ask a question of them.
There's a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, someone is asking how, I think here, I would like to become a member. How do you do that?
Okay, you can join at, okay, you see https nonprofitutopia.mnco. So if you go to that link, that will take you to our membership site, and then you can join there. It's $14.99 a month. Okay, are there any other questions or comments? Alrighty, so I just want to say thank you to everyone who took the time to listen, whether you're here in Zoom, whether you're on Facebook, YouTube, or any of our other streaming communities. I realize how valuable your time is. I hope that you have found these tools to be very, very helpful. Again, we're going to be going through the entire strategic planning process, and we'll be meeting again on Wednesday to go through the next phase. All righty, so if there are no further questions, I will end this meeting for everyone except for Carlena. She and I have some stuff to discuss, and I will make sure. You know what, Carlena, I'm going to end this meeting because we're streaming live on Facebook. So you and
Okay.
I will get together very shortly. All right.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you so much. All right. All right. Take care. Bye.